So this is the title I've been given, Reaching People Beyond the Walls of the Church. So that's a good title. Now, when I agreed to do this quite a few months ago, it seemed a good idea at the time. Then last week, it seemed to be an increasingly bad idea, thinking, why did I agree to do this? So there are one or two caveats, okay, just to share with you. First of all, you're the experts, really. If you're in the evangelism network, no doubt you have as much experience as I have in doing evangelism. So I'm certainly not an expert. I do what I can, and I've been doing it for a little while, but I'm here to learn. But don't regard me as an expert. We're learning together on this. Another caveat is, actually, the title Reaching People Beyond the Walls of the Church, I think probably describes most evangelism anyway. Okay, there are people in the church we need to reach, but most evangelism in Europe does actually probably come under that title. So the title could have been How to Do Evangelism, I guess. Now, some contexts are very specific. So is Michael Ox a part of this group? So he does a lot of university missions, doesn't he? A lot of student work. And that is reaching people beyond the walls of the church. But it's a very specific context. And believe it or not, I was a student once. And when I was at uni, I was involved in that. But that's not what I'm involved in these days. So some contexts are very specific. Just say my experience is mainly UK-based. But as we go through, we're hopefully learning some principles that apply across the whole of Europe. But no, when I talk about evangelism, I'm coming from a UK base. And I will say this, the principles that we're going to look at can be applied to individual evangelism. So it can apply to, now who here knows Gary Carr-Smith? No, I didn't think you would. He's my next door neighbour. Okay, so I have a responsibility to speak to Gary, one of my next door neighbours. Okay, so the principles today apply to that kind of situation. Who here has heard of Headley Park Church? No? That's the church I go to. So these principles apply to me being involved in my local church and trying to reach our local community. But today I want to think, well, how do we reach people beyond the walls of the church, perhaps on a national scale? Okay, and so maybe thinking, I would say bigger, that's probably the wrong phrase, but trying to think about how do we reach the masses with the gospel? And the question for this morning is, what can we do nationally to reach ordinary, now this is a British phrase, reach ordinary Joe Bloggs and his family. Joe Bloggs is a phrase that describes an ordinary person with an ordinary family doing an ordinary job, ordinary Joe Bloggs. So today I want to think about what can we do nationally to reach those kind of people? You know, the people who happen to be in your community, but how can we do it on a national scale? So those are some of the caveats. Before I worked for UBM, well, my background is maths. So I do quite like stats, all right? I'm one of those people who give me some numbers, I'm happy. Give me some words, I struggle. But here's some stats. And the various sources for these, and they may not be totally accurate, but it gives you a picture. But there's 733 million people in Europe. Only 18 million are evangelicals, only 2.5%. That's a lot of people unreached with the gospel, isn't it? That includes the UK, yeah. But in various countries, you might disagree with some of these stats, but they're broadly correct. So in the UK, for example, 2%, they say, are evangelical. Some will go higher, some will even go lower. Poland, I guess, where we are, lots of people go to church, but in terms of evangelical, 0.3%. And then particular cities, anyone here from Belgrade? Good, because I might be wrong here, but they reckon that's of a 2 million population, only 2,000 are evangelical believers. That is a small, small percentage, okay? And just choosing another country, Sweden, in a recent survey, 75% of Swedes in the sort of 16 to 29-year-old age bracket classify themselves as having no religion. And those figures, vary from country to country. The UK is probably about 70%. So those are some of the, so that's the environment which we work in. As I say, different countries across Europe will have different percentages, but broadly across Europe, that's where we're at. So, how do we reach the 725 million that are unreached or not evangelical believers? Humanly speaking, very few of them will ever enter a Bible-based, gospel-loving church. That's the reality. So how do they hear the good news of Jesus, if that's the case? So we're going to look at some biblical principles and perhaps one or two examples, concrete examples of how to reach people beyond the walls of the church. And there are many Bible examples, biblical examples we can look at. So, for example, in Acts 17, verse 17, the Apostle Paul was told reason both in the synagogue and in the marketplace. When he went to Ephesus, it was in the lecture halls, so presumably a hired building. But if you want to learn from the master, we look at Jesus Christ himself, don't we? And so we're going to look at one particular passage to come up with some principles, and then we'll ask some questions at the end. Now, I would have to say this. Obviously, I work with beach missions. So Jesus, when he was speaking to the masses, he did it on the beaches. So Jesus is, I think, the prime example of doing beach missions. So the crowds were there so big that he got on the boat, cast out a little bit into the sea and preached from the boat, Luke 5. So Jesus, I think, is, in terms of beach missions, is the example to follow. So examples of Jesus preaching, obviously, in the open air. When they fed the 5,000 people, he was preaching to them first. Okay, but we're going to look at how he dealt with an individual. So, as I say, these principles apply to individual evangelism, local church evangelism, but we're going to think about the national picture. But we're going to look at John 4 particularly, when Jesus speaks to the Samaritan woman. But in John 3, John 4, and John 5, you have Jesus interacting with different people. So in John 3, I've called it the ignorant, Nicodemus. He had no clue, really, as to who Jesus was. In John 4, I've called it the insignificant, someone who was shunned by society, the Samaritan woman. And in John 5, you have the indignant, the angry people who were opposed to Jesus healing on the Sabbath. But if you look at the difference between John 3 and John 4, it's quite instructive. In John 3, it's a man. In John 4, it's a woman. In John 3, it's a Jew. In John 4, it's a Samaritan. In John 3, someone who's religious. In John 4, someone who's not religious, in fact, quite rebellious. In John 3, a respected person. In John 4, a shunned person. In John 3, it happened at midnight. In John 4, it happened at midday. In John 3, it was Nicodemus who started the conversation. In John 4, it was Christ who started the conversation. In John 3, it was straight into conversations about spiritual things. We know our teacher come from God by the miracles you're doing. Straight in. In John 4, it took a little while to be able to talk about who Jesus is. So it was a sort of general conversation at the start. And so my question is this. What's the difference? One became a secret disciple for a while, Nicodemus, and one became an immediate public witness to what God had done in her life. But here's a question. What's the difference between a fishing net and a fishing rod? By the way, I don't do fishing. I am no expert in fishing at all. It's one sport. Anyone here do fishing? I bet not. Well, I won't say anything then. Okay. Well, what's the difference between a fishing net and a fishing rod? Well, it's probably fairly obvious in some ways. But then if you've got a fishing net, what's the difference between a drag net and a trawler net? The answer is I don't know. But I do know this. Depending on what type of fish you want to catch, you either use a net or a rod or a different type of net. That's as much as my fishing knowledge goes to, by the way. So if you want to catch a shark, do you use a net or do you use a rod? A rod. How do you catch a trout? I don't know. They say you tickle the trout, don't they? But the point is this. John 3 and John 4, it's like Jesus is using different strategies, different techniques, because he knows who he's trying to reach. So we're going to look at a bit of the John 4 model here, which is reaching the unreached who have no knowledge of the gospel, who are unchurched. So how you might reach those who are churched might be slightly different, okay? So we'll look at John chapter 4. Don't know if you haven't got it open, but I'll just refer to one or two verses. The first thing I'll say is this, and you know this really, is understand the context. But there are two parts to understanding context. I think, first of all, understand the biblical context, and then look at cultural context. And what I mean is this really. Sometimes we look at cultural context first, but actually if we understand what the Bible tells us about any non-Christian, that's unchanging. Cultural contexts change over time. They vary by geography. So we're going to look at understanding context biblically first. And there's a famous American, Donald Rumsfeld, who once said this. It's back in 2002. He said, there are known knowns. There are things we know we know. We also know that there are known unknowns. That is to say, we know there are some things we do not know. But there are also unknown unknowns. The ones we don't know, we don't know. And that became quite a famous quote at the time. It was a bit of a tongue twister. But the point I want to make at this is, when we read the Bible, we are told things about non-Christians, and so we can say confidently we know this is how a non-Christian thinks, because this is what the Bible tells us a non-Christian thinks. And even if a non-Christian denies that they think that way, we either believe them or we believe the Bible. Does that make sense? So sometimes our evangelism, in some ways, is shaped by what non-Christians are telling us they think, rather than what the Bible is telling us we know how they think. So here are some examples. And I've thrown out some references, so you have to be quick to write the references down. We're told that non-Christians know that there is a God who is glorious. So that's Psalm 19, verse 1, and Romans 1, verse 19. So they know that. They might deny it, but they know it, that there is a God that is glorious. They know that there is a God who is good. So Acts 14, verse 17. They know there is a God who is righteous. That's Psalm 97, verse 6. They know they have sinned. So that's Romans 2, verses 14 and 15. They know there's a judgment to come. Romans 1, verse 32. And they know there is an eternity. Ecclesiastes 3, verse 11. So we know that they know it. And we know that they'll do everything to suppress that truth. That's again Romans 1. I don't know when you travelled here, you have your case, and you've got more stuff to put in the case than the space of your case allows. You have that experience when you're trying to pack your case, you think, how's it all going to get in? So what you do is you get maybe someone in your family, look, you sit on the case while I zip it up, all right? And the idea is, we'll get this all in. And in some ways, that's the picture of suppressing the truth. It's an effort to suppress the truth. It's like sitting on the case. It's hard work. But as soon as you open the zip, it all pops out again. And so people are suppressing the truth. But we know what they know, even if they deny it. And I think that's important in evangelism. Because although we might not confront them directly with it, I think we have to have confidence. Actually, we do know that you know that there's a God. You might say otherwise, but you know it, okay? So the understanding context, I think, biblically helps us in our evangelism. So even unchurched people, they know those things I've just listed, that there is a God who is glorious, a God who is good, a God who is righteous, that we have sinned, there is a judgment, there is eternity. They know that. But understand culturally. So Jesus in John 4, he knew exactly what he was doing. He knew exactly what Samaritans thought. He knew that his conversation with Nicodemus in the previous chapter was speaking to a religious Jew, so he understood that. And he knew when he spoke to the Samaritan where she was coming from. He knew all those things. He knew what they thought, what she thought, how she ticked, and the same again with Nicodemus. So the question is, how do we find out the context, the cultural context in which we are serving? Okay? I don't know how you find out, but in some ways, for me, because obviously from the UK, I just read the BBC website, which frustrates me enormously. But some of the consistent messages that the BBC put out, I think, well, that's what they're trying to push. Or you see what are the popular TV programs that people are watching, especially the reality TV programs. What's engaging people's minds? What they talk about at work. On the school gate, our children are grown up now, so we don't do the school gate run, but talking to families at the school gate, what are they talking about? For those who do social media, what are the trending hashtags, right? Before I was worked for Beach, I was a computer programmer. I was using hashtags back in the 1990s as a computer programming tool. Then it became popular amongst the young people for different contexts. But what's trending at these days? And I think the broad cultural context of the UK is they have three views of Christianity. One, it's not true. One, it's not relevant. And thirdly, and increasingly so, it's not palatable because it challenges their way of life. So they're saying, I don't want to deal with Christianity because it's not palatable to me. It's distasteful to me, they say, because their perception of Christianity is dealing with issues that they want to let happen. Okay, so this is a bit about the UK. So I would say it's UK. This is in the 1950s. Generally, people went to church. People called themselves Christians, even though they weren't, and generally positive towards Christianity. That was the 1950s. Then in the 1980s, roughly, people, maybe they went to Sunday school, but they would call themselves agnostic. It didn't do anything for them. So they weren't negative to Christianity, but they were a bit further back in their understanding of the gospel. And now in the 2010s onwards, really, people have never been to church. They call themselves atheist, even though they're not, and they're quite negative to Christianity. And so the gap in, if you like, the connection we have to make is a bigger leap for people. So that's the UK scene, and perhaps I think generally across, certainly Western Europe, and that's where we're at. But understand context. So whatever context you're in, work it out. And then there are variations locally. So I live in a small town. The context of a small town in the southwest of England is different to the context of a city in the southwest of England. So I live in Clevedon. Bristol is about 10 miles away. The two are very different. Okay, so even locally you have to understand the context. So what affects people in Clevedon is different to what affects people in Bristol. Now, here's the next thing. Overcome complacency. Overcome complacency. Here's three statements. Sometimes we lack confidence, which leads to defeatism. Because we're not confident in the gospel sometimes, we think, we might as well give up. We lack courage sometimes, and that paralyzes us, at least paralysis. We think, I'm too frightened to go out there. But sometimes we lack compassion, which leads to complacency. But in John 4, Jesus had every single reason not to speak to that Samaritan woman. Culturally, it was a big leap, I suppose, but he was tired. He was thirsty. He probably felt dusty. But we're told in John 4, it says he needed to go through Samaria. Well, actually, he didn't need to go through Samaria in some ways. And that statement is saying he was aware there was a soul to be won, and he had compassion on that soul, and therefore he needed to go. And he had to overcome. If there was any reason, well, Jesus had lots of reasons he could give to say, actually, I won't go to Samaria. It's much easier if I don't. But in some ways, obviously, he's the Son of God, but he overcame that. He knew he had to go to Samaria, and it was the compassion that drove him. And I think sometimes overcoming complacency is we just need, and God gives us that. As we read his word and see the state of the wicked, then we should be praying that, Lord, speak to me to see the state of the wicked. So you read the Psalms particularly. No, it's the psalmist engaging with God and then looking, Psalm 119, 3 times it talks about eyes. So 3 references to eyes in Psalm 119. One is about his own sin. One is about opening his eyes to see what's in God's word. But the third reference to eyes in Psalm 119 is about open my eyes to see the state of those around me. So we need to overcome complacency. And, it's a challenge. It's a heart issue, isn't it? That's not a technique we learn. That's spending time in God's word with our Saviour and asking him, speak to me, Lord, that I may speak. Show me the state of the lost. So Jonah didn't want to reach the Ninevites because he had no compassion for them. And God had to deal with him quite harshly in the end. Thirdly, really is starting conversations. So, as I say, in the previous chapter, John 3, it was Nicodemus who started the conversation. But here it was Christ who started the conversation. There were barriers. So the Samaritan woman says, now, how is it you, being a Jew, ask for a drink from me? What are you doing talking to me? And later on in the chapter, when the disciples had gone away and they'd come back, the disciples said to Jesus, what are you doing speaking to the Samaritan woman? So Jesus had to initiate the conversation. And how do you do it? Well, first of all, meet people where they are. So that's psych as well. That's where Jesus went. Meet people where they are. So think about it individually. So I play volleyball. I'm not very tall. I'm getting a bit old. But I play volleyball, A, because I like it. But B, I meet non-Christian men in the town in which I live. But on the national scale, maybe think about, where do you meet people? Where are people? Which is why I'm involved in beach missions, because in the UK, lots of people go on holiday to the beach. So on a beach, depending on what beach it is, on Bournemouth Beach, on a hot day, they reckon you can get about 100,000 people on the beach. That's a small city, isn't it? So most places in the UK, popular holiday places, you have thousands of people. So I'm a great believer in beach work because that's where people are. And there are people who potentially have no contact with any Christian, have no desire to go to church, but we're going to where they are. So beaches is not the only thing, by the way, but is there a place that you know where people go en masse that you can try and reach them? Okay, we do some city work as well. It's a slightly different ball game, but go to where people are. So individually, it could be, as you're going around the shops, but think about it nationally as well. Where are the great masses of people that you can engage with? And talk to them about what interests them. So what did Jesus talk about first in John chapter 4? Water. What was the woman interested in? Water. Why was she coming to the well? To get water. What did Jesus want? Water. So he talked about things that interested her. Now, I think learning the art of conversation is a skill that we need to develop. And to be able to speak to anybody about anything that interests them, even if you're not interested in it, is a good thing to do. So can you talk about knitting? I have not got a clue about knitting, apart from knit one, purl one, yarn forward, yarn front, or whatever. I've got a clue. But if someone's interested in knitting, I need to be able to talk about knitting. I'm meeting up with a non-Christian friend next week who's just been voted a local councillor. Now, I'm not particularly interested in politics or local politics, but he is. So when I'm going to talk to him, he'll be talking about local politics to start with. And it's the art of conversation. Also, the art of conversation, even though inwardly you're not interested in it, but showing that you are interested in it. Not deceiving people, but actually genuinely taking an interest. And again, when we're on the beaches, our conversations are starting with, well, tell us about your family. And lots of children know, what year are they in at school? Anything, whatever they're interested in. So, obviously, sports is quite a big thing. So I'm a Liverpool Football Club supporter. We came second in the league, having lost one game. But we've got the Champions League final to look forward to. But talk about sport. Even if it means talking about Manchester United. Oh, perish the thought, Look for opportunities to talk about what interests them. And I would say when you're trying to reach people, don't discriminate. Obviously, Jesus didn't do that. He was a Jew speaking to a Samaritan. Don't discriminate. Don't be judgmental. And I think probably more subconsciously, sometimes we do discriminate. We naturally don't talk to people who are very different to us. But I think we need to overcome that. And I think when you're in big crowds and have gospel opportunity, you could be speaking to anybody. And don't discriminate. And when they share things with you, and inwardly you're shocked, thinking, oh, really? Don't show that, just don't be judgmental. So start conversations, get to know people. Fourthly, win confidences. So in the beach context, what happens is they come down on the beach, and we're there, and we have a uniform so people know who we are. So I have red shirts, blue bottoms. What are people going to think to start with? Probably, who's that crazy bunch over there? What are they doing? I came down to have a nice, quiet day on the beach. Actually, can't have a quiet day on the beach. It doesn't exist. But no, certainly in today's age, a few years ago it was slightly different. But people come and they're suspicious of Christians. They are. They are a strange bunch. They have preconceived ideas about what a Christian is and what they believe. And so we got to win confidences. And so in John 4, that's what Jesus does with the Samaritan woman. So at the beginning, she says, "You're a Jew." And then she says, "Sir." And as you look through, her confidence is won. So eventually she's having good conversation. Sometimes in our enthusiasm to share the gospel, we go straight in, and we might have somehow explained about who Jesus is and what he came to do, but they're not listening because they're not ready. They're trying to work out who is this person. So to win confidences, and sometimes that does take time. So be patient as you seek to win confidences. So, but I would say be noticeably different. I'll tell you a story. So this has happened 2 years ago on the beach mission I was doing in Cornwall, which is right in the southwest of England. So a husband and a wife, and they had one young daughter, and the young daughter, they were happy for the daughter to join in. And so she just joined in our activities, and mum and dad were watching on the edge, and just chatting to them, getting to know them a bit, what they enjoyed doing, that kind of thing. So the first time we met them was on Sunday afternoon, the first time we went down on the beach. On the Tuesday afternoon, so they'd come on Sunday, they'd come on Monday, and on Tuesday. On Tuesday, I spoke to the husband, and he said this: "At the start of the week, I was an atheist. I am not so sure now. I hadn't had any spiritual conversation with him. We hadn't had some intellectual debate. None of that at all. All he'd done was watch the team in action, saw a bunch of, mainly young people in this case, just obviously enjoying the gospel and sharing the gospel, enjoying working on the beach with the families, and thought there was something different about, this is not what I thought a Christian was." So he had some preconceived idea of Christianity, and then he saw something different. He thought, actually, the two don't tie up. There must be something which I've missed. And so be noticeably different. And so that is including common courtesy. So I'm still old-fashioned enough to, ladies first, okay? But no, for example, on the beach, have you ever tried to push a pushchair on the beach? It's hard work. So as a team, I say to the team, just go and help carry the pushchair. That's all you're doing. Don't enter in the spiritual conversation. Just help them carry the pushchair. Those sort of things are noticed. And so whoever we're trying to reach, be noticeably different. Be patient and don't give up. Jesus, after the first initial conversation with, he thought, oh, this is going to be hard work. Be patient and don't give up. And I know of stories of people, again, in the beach context in which I work, they meet us 1 year and they're very cautious. But the second year, they sit on the beach a bit closer to where we have our stuff. Then the third year, a bit closer. And there's one fellow, I think, who's now a pastor of a church. He was converted after 5 years of seeing beach missions because his confidences were, we won him over. Just invest in people. Spend time with people. I think that's self-explanatory. Okay. Now this is getting a bit more tricky. Prick consciences, because sometimes we build lots of bridges to get to know people, and we make the bridges really, really strong, and we make them very intricate, but then sometimes we fail to cross the bridge. Do you know what I mean? You think, oh, I keep bridge building, but there has to become a point where you've built that bridge, and you have to, either you go across or get them to come across, whatever it is. The picture is, you're building bridges with a purpose. And so Jesus gets to the point where actually he challenges the Samaritan woman with her lifestyle is not as it should be. But he does use tact. So he says, oh, go and call your husband. He knew that she didn't have a husband. In fact, he knew that she'd had 5 husbands, and the man she was now living with was not her husband. Jesus knew that. But why did he say, go? It was with tremendous tact. It wasn't, in that sense, it wasn't judgmental. It's making her realize, oh, my life isn't as it should be. But he did use truth. So he did say, well, no, you've had 5 husbands, and now the one you have is not your husband. So he did very carefully with tact point out that sin is serious, and that he had to sort of point that out applicable to her situation. Similar to tact, he used tenderness. He was kind. He was thoughtful. Another example, John 8, the woman caught in adultery. The tenderness of Jesus is incredible. And if you look at John's Gospel chapter, there are several occasions when Jesus tenderly says woman, meaning with real tenderness. And, sorry, it has to begin with T, so use timing. In John 4, what I'm saying is this. The amount of timing issues in John 4 is incredible. So it just so happened he needed to go through Samaria. It just so happened at that time the Samaritan woman came. So it's God's timing. And actually, he was prepared to invest time, spend time. And then, when, humanly speaking, timing seems to go awfully badly wrong, the disciples come just when Jesus was getting to the crunch point, when Jesus was just about to explain who he was. The disciples came and messed things up, it seemed, so that the woman left and went back to the village. That was the worst timing ever in terms of gospel work. Disciples, you just put your foot right in it here. But even when our plans seem to be thwarted, God can still do a work. So the woman went back to the village. And actually the next time that Jesus saw the woman, she brought the whole village with her, saying, come and see this man who told me everything about me, the Saviour of the world. And we're told that the whole village, the whole city believed. Then explain Christ. And I think whoever we're doing gospel work with, we need to be well-intentioned. So wherever people are starting at, have in your mind, I need to get them to the Jesus Christ, the cross and the resurrection. Now this is a very much an English phrase, although I did notice that Ramirez used it today, slightly differently to how I'd use it, but the phrase red herring, does that mean anything to anyone? It's when people raise things which are really a distraction. We call them red herrings. Really, they're just raising questions, objections. They don't really want to talk about that, but it sort of distracts them from talking about the real issues. And so we have what we call red herring questions. They ask questions, you think, well, they're not really interested in that answer, but it stops them being challenged about more sort of challenging things. So be prepared for, and this woman, she was asking all kinds of red herring questions. What about where we should worship, this mountain or that mountain? Really it was a red herring. The issue wasn't about what mountain to worship on. The issue was about who Jesus Christ is. And this is my advice. People do have genuine questions. I think you need to start with where people are at and their genuine questions. But some people, when you answer that question, they have another question. When you answer that question, they have another question. And if I sense that, sometimes I say this, look, what is the most important question in your mind about the Christian faith? So this makes them stop and think. And I said, okay, what's your most important question? And they might come up with an answer. And then I say, therefore, if I can try and answer your most important question, you should have no follow-up questions, really, because I've dealt with your most important question. And if I can't answer your most important question, does it mean it can't be answered? And it just stops people in their tracks a little bit and makes them think, well, actually, what is my most important question? And I might say this, I'll tell you what, you choose your most important question, then if you don't mind, I'll choose my most important question. And I think we can trade with people. So don't get stuck into this endless cycle of trying to deal with all their questions, because some people are good at asking lots and lots of questions. Get them to ask their most important question and say, well, do you mind if I ask my most important question? So explain Christ. Be prepared for red herring questions. But look, one of the questions it varies a bit depending on who I'm talking to, but one that I have in my mind is this. How do you explain the empty tomb? So I'll make a statement saying there is an empty tomb. And if they say there wasn't an empty tomb, I think they're denying history. So I say, how do you explain the empty tomb? And if you look at Acts 26, basically that's what Paul says to Agrippa. Why do you think it incredible that God should raise Jesus from the dead? That's the question that Paul asked Agrippa. So that's one of the questions I might ask, but it does vary on the context a little bit. And that one, I think when you deal with the resurrection, you then automatically deal with the death of Christ. So I think the resurrection question, for me, is one that how do you explain the empty tomb? And also, it's it's putting us on the front foot. Why do we have to give all the answers? They need to be able to defend where their position is. So well, how do you explain the empty tomb? That's the one I often use. But so look to explain Christ. So learn the art of getting from where they are to what they need to know about Christ. So Jesus got from water very skillfully to talk about to living water, to eventually, I'm the Messiah, I am He. And then finally, before the last slide, expect conversions. So even in this tough environment of Europe, people are still getting converted. So we did our first mission of the season a couple of weeks ago. We have a bank holiday at the start of May, and we go to one place where lots of people, and an 80-plus-year-old lady, we believe, trusted Christ when she heard the gospel message for the first time. And she went away with her face beaming, really. And in some ways you think, well, it shouldn't have happened in this day and age. People don't become Christians, do they? But I think we should still expect conversions. God can still transform lives. And so don't give up in sharing the gospel. Okay. My last slide, I'm going to have some questions. I'm saying, why consider the UBM model? I'll be tempted to say everyone should do beach missions, because I'm a great believer in it. But no, gospel work is bigger than beach missions. But having said that, it is pretty good. Okay. But I'm saying, the UBM model, why consider the UBM model? Which is, really, the first of my session today is trying to reach the masses, if you like, with the gospel. So we should be involved in individual evangelism. We should be involved in local church evangelism. But the UBM model is trying to reach people across the whole country en masse with the gospel. So why consider it the UBM model? I'd say it's effective evangelism. And the way it works on UBM is simply this. People are on holiday. When you're on holiday, your mindset changes totally. So if you're ordinary Joe Bloggs and you've got a busy job in the city of London, you leave early, you come back late, you probably don't see your children, you're tired, you've got to have your meal, and to engage with people when look, I've got work the next day, I just really don't want to talk. When they're on holiday, people are relaxed. They've got time on their hands. There's no pressure of the work next day. And their whole demeanour and their whole persona changes in some ways. That they're willing to chat. I've got time. Yeah, I don't mind having a chat. So that's why I think beach missions works, because we're reaching people who are in a position where they've got more time on their hands. So, and it reaches thousands. As I say, I go to various places, and you're talking about thousands of people on holiday. So some of our popular holiday places, the winter population might be 5,000 people. The summer population might be 50,000 people. People go on holiday. I don't know about all countries, but where people go on holiday, there are thousands of people. And they say, that picture I showed you at the beginning of a place called Lyme Regis, all those children virtually would be from non-Christian homes. The parents they don't teach them the Bible, they don't go to church. So they might, as far as we know, they have no other Christian contact. They might do, they might have people that they work with, etc. And also, the UBM model is you're reaching people where they feel safe. They can walk away. And that's the challenge of our evangelism is, at any stage, they can just, I'm bored with this, I walk away. But actually, it's good because they feel safe. They're not trapped. They're not in a building where they think, the doors are shut, they've locked me in here, I can't get out. They feel safe. And in that sense, there's no pressure or obligation on them to stay. They can just... so creating an environment where they feel safe. I don't think, again, perhaps in the UK, I don't think we realise how difficult it is for people to go across into a church building if they've never been before. I mean, there's some social clubs in Cleveland, I think, I would never go there. I just don't know what the building looks like behind those doors. I don't know who I'll meet first. And so just on sort of the social scale, people don't go into unknown buildings, let alone churches, because what's behind there? But in the open space, people feel safer. They can just walk away. And I think it helps overcome prejudices. I talked about that man who said, I was an atheist, I'm not so sure now. They see Christianity in work in hopefully a friendly context. Okay? And the other thing, as I said, without necessarily having big academic debates. And the other thing I would say is this, why the UBM model. We take people at the age of 15. So our team members, minimum age is 15, maximum age is whatever. And it equips people for ministry. So often, when we have young people on a team, they've shared their gospel possibly with their friends, but they're getting involved in evangelism in the public space for the first time in a safe environment, as a team environment. And it's quite foundational in their Christian growth if they're getting involved in gospel work as a 15, 16-year-old, whatever. And even if they don't do beach missions for years to come, it'd be nice if they did. But actually, part of my role in some ways, our organisation role is, if we play some small part in equipping people for future ministry, then that's great. So let me tell you, so is Michael Otts meant to be one of your session leaders here? Is he with you, or Michael Otts? Michael Otts, is he meant to be part of this group? Yeah. He's probably, I'll tell you a secret about Michael Otts. He does university missions now, across the whole of Europe. As a 16-year-old, he did beach missions. And if you quiz him, you say that's where he first really learned to share his faith. Now, I would love Michael to come back on beach missions. But actually, it's great that he's doing other ministry. Now, there are other key factors in Michael's, he obviously talks about Michael Green quite a lot. But UBM had a small part to play. Peter Williams, Tyndale House. Believe it or not, he and I were on a team together as teenagers, beach mission team, back in the day. His first ever team as a 16-year-old. I'm slightly older than him. Well, I can tell you some things about Peter Williams as a 16-year-old, but... and actually, Peter still does beach missions. So his main ministry is, obviously, Bible manuscripts and all that kind of stuff. But he's done beach missions. And whether it's people like them, or if it gives people an impact, it gives them a concern for the gospel, then whether it's local church context or whatever. So UBM, the model is this, creating opportunities for young people to engage with evangelism, which they then take back to their own contexts and reach the nation. And so that's what's happened in the UK. Over 65 years we've been doing it. And I think this is my last thing. That allows people to do mission as a family. So we try and create opportunities that you can do mission as a family. So I've been doing UBM since I was 16, 17. When I got married and my boys were growing up, my wife wasn't on the team, but they always used to come. And doing mission as a family is a great thing to do. So this summer, my boys are all married now, but there's 1 week of mission I'm doing, and they've all applied to come on the team that I'm leading. So it's a bit of a strange team. I feel sorry for those who are not a Howlett, that's my surname, coming on that team, because there's me and my wife, my 3 sons and their wives on the team. But to be able to do mission together as a family, even as they're growing up, is a tremendous blessing. And so that's another thing I think the UBM model does. I've spoken for far too long, I'm sure. So I think my concern is this, that we can reach nations for the gospel. So these principles apply to individual evangelism, local church evangelism, but I think what I'm trying to share is the concern that we should have to try and reach the nation for Christ. And this is, obviously, UBM is a specific ministry, but hopefully it shows that the model can be applied even in non-beach countries. Okay, so we do a mission in Switzerland, which is okay as a country, but it's got no beaches. But we do a mission in Switzerland, so